Today we'll be uncovering 13 marvelous mammals you probably didn't know about. We'll start with Tom's sword-nosed bat, an aptly named mammal species whose lance-shaped snoz arrives to a function about 15 minutes for the rest of the animal. You know how many bats echolocate, like how they scream into the void, #relatable, and listen for a returning echo? Well, Tom's sword-nosed bat echolocates nasally, and so it's believed the species' large snoot evolved to serve a role in modifying and directing echolocation calls. Native to the forests of Central and South America, this insect-eating bat escapes being depicted using Hollywood's L filter by, like most bats, being active mostly at night. Tom's sword-nosed bat's 0.8-inch or 20mm sword nose is technically known as a leaf nose, but of course, Tom's leaf-nosed bat doesn't sound nearly as badass, and so never really caught on. Then again, if the goal of every animal name was to sound as cool as possible, then our next mammal would definitely need a new moniker, because the only things tufted pygmy squirrel impresses are the insects, tree bark, lichen, and other vegetation it feeds upon. The species is endemic to, or only found in, the highland forests of Borneo, which for the geographically inept is a large island in Southeast Asia. The tufted pygmy squirrel was named for its long white ear tufts, which are about as unmistakable as the listeners of Luke Skywalker's favorite backpack.
Less than half a stick of butter the squirrel weighs. Go now to the beach to feed some seagulls, I will.
Thanks, horribly impersonated Yoda. Anyhow, like many other species of squirrel, the tufted pygmy squirrel is arboreal or spends its life in the trees. Meanwhile, some other mammals are fossorial or largely spend life in below-ground burrows. A good example of this are badgers, which include the very polite-looking European badger, the notoriously psychotic honey badger, and, weirdest of all, the greater hog badger. What exactly makes this Southeast Asian badger greater? Hell if I know. But I do know that the species was named after its pig-like snout, which it uses to root around in the dirt, much like a wild boar, or your one friend who, that one time in college, ate an entire tray of some very suspicious-looking brownies and then decided he was going to tunnel all the way to China. Idiot. Anyway, the greater hog badger digs to find food, and it eats just about everything from roots to fruits and tubers to tiny animals. In other words, it ain't all that picky. The pygmy right whale, on the other hand, or flipper, is as dietarily selective as a gluten-intolerant vegan, dining exclusively on small copepods and krill. It feeds by taking in massive amounts of water and then filtering out its minute prey through baleen plates. At only 20 feet or 6 meters, the pygmy right whale is the smallest living baleen whale, something the other right whales like to constantly remind it of. Yet, this species is not very closely related to those other right whales, as, unlike them, it may belong to Satyrotheridae, a whale family that was once thought to be entirely extinct. The pygmy right whale, which inhabits the southern hemisphere waters, is also perhaps the only baleen whale that wasn't nearly hunted to extinction by us humans, aka the naked ape, which coincidentally was also my nickname in college. Yeah, I hated college. The Hispaniolan solenodon, too, has an interesting nickname. It's sometimes referred to as the father of carnage. Okay, that might not be entirely true, but the species is one of only a handful of mammals alive today with venom. Much like the Venom films, the Hispaniolan solenodon's bite causes nothing but pain and is said to feel like a snake bite, whose symptoms include several days of localized swelling and severe agony. Of course, the small, shrew-like mammal mainly uses its toxins to subdue its insect and earthworm prey, not to envenomate people. The Hispaniolan solenodon is native to the Caribbean island of Hispaniola, where it ekes out a living by remaining hidden in burrows, hollow logs, or caves during the day, and emerging at night to hunt and perform its best Tom Hardy impressions. Think of it like how the channel you're watching right now is likely the 1 millionth Salmonella knockoff on YouTube, or how the Pernian Desmond took one look at the platypus's peculiar lifestyle and said, bet. By that, I mean that, like Dr. Heinz Doofenshmirtz's arch nemesis, this tiny creature from Europe's Iberian Peninsula is a semi-aquatic freak. Covered in velvety waterproof fur and in possession of webbed feet, the Pernian Desmond is well adapted to living in fast-flowing rivers where it dines on marine insects. To detect prey, it uses its long, odd-looking snoot that is covered in whiskers and contains an Eimer's organ. Whose Eimer? I don't know or care, but his organ has specialized sensory receptors in it. In other words, the Pernian Desmond is as sensitive to touch as liberals are to high-quality humor. The cryptic pangolin is also quite sensitive to overexploitation, that is. You see, like all pangolins, this Asian species is covered in scales made of keratin, the same material found in our fingernails, and their scales actually feel a bit like fingernails. I should know, in 2023, I had the privilege to see and touch a Temminck's ground pangolin being cared for at a South African wildlife rehab. Anyway, pangolin scales are highly sought after for the male bovine feces, that is Chinese traditional medicine, and thus pangolins are the world's most trafficked mammals. How fun. The cryptic pangolin is actually only known from its scales. A 2023 study found that some confiscated pangolin scales were genetically distinct enough to belong to a new, as yet undescribed species. Thankfully, we can help save pangolins by spreading the word about their plight. Another thing that we should spread the word about is the golden bamboo lemur, and not only because it was seemingly named after that banger song from K-pop Demon Hunters, but also because this species is one of the craziest primates around. What exactly is so wild about this Madagascan? Well, it's able to ingest up to 12 times as much cyanide as would be lethal for another species of its size. However, this primate isn't doing the lemur equivalent of the Tide Pod challenge because its digestive system is adapted to absorb the toxin. It receives its daily dose of cyanide from the bamboo it eats. By mainly eating bamboo shoots, the golden bamboo lemur is not only able to avoid competition with other species that can't ingest the toxic plant part, but is also one bad mother bamboo ingester. Of course, some mammals aren't notable for their diet, but for a unique physical characteristic. For example, Donald Trump's golden pheasant-like appearance is perhaps the next most recognizable trait of the current American president after, his extreme lack of empathy for all living beings. Meanwhile, the Chashinga of India and Nepal stands out for being the only antelope with 2 sets of horns. This special quirk is apparently so noteworthy that the science nerds gave it the scientific name of Tetracerus quadricornis, which just means 4 horns twice, once in Greek and once in Latin. These horns are only found in males. The Chashinga is also relatively small, standing only about 2 feet or 0.6 meters tall at the shoulder, making it one of Asia's smallest bovines. Hey, at least the short king has a crown. The southern Viscosha, meanwhile, doesn't have a crown, but it does have a mustache composed of long, sensitive whiskers that allow it to navigate the rocky Andean mountains of South America. Looking like the illegitimate child of a rabbit and a squirrel, the species is actually more closely related to chinchillas. However, unlike chinchillas, the southern Viscosha hasn't been exploited by humans looking to turn it into a household pet that you impulsively bought from PetSmart and are entirely unprepared to care for. Sorry. Anyway, the fluffy rodent is most active soon after dawn and again in the evening, at which points it feeds on whatever plant material is available, including undigested plant parts in its own feces, making the southern Viscosha the world's most adorable coprophagus, ursine grills. Montane South America is home to far more than just one lesser-known mammal. In fact, mammal nerds known as mammalogists, how creative I know, are still discovering new species, such as the Chachapoya mouse opossum, which was only scientifically described last year. This petite marsupial has a head-body length of a mere 4 inches or 10.7 centimeters, and its tail adds only another 6 inches or 16 centimeters. In other words, it's not even as long as my delicious Subway sandwich. Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Anyway, a little classified behind-the-scenes info for you. I included this new species in the video because it was actually described in part by my college mammalogy professor. I won't name them so they don't have to be linked with this Thor-forsaken video, but I figured I could still shout out their amazing discovery nevertheless. Speaking of amazing, one of the most amazing seals in the world is also one of the world's smallest. Found only in Lake Baikal in Siberia, Russia, the 4.3 foot or 1.3 meter Baikal seal, also known as the Nerpa or anti-capitalist water doggo, is the only seal known to live exclusively in fresh water. The species primarily eats small fishes and in fall likes to seek out a specific type of fish known as Kessler sculpin, which has grit in its stomach that cleans out the Baikal seal's digestive tract and removes parasites. Regarding liking things, if you're somehow liking this video, then you really ought to smash that like button harder than 2 Baikal seals playing a rousing game of hide the slippery sculpin, which, by the way, typically results in a single, absolutely adorable pup covered in long, white, woolly coat. Mind you, some mammals are adorable throughout their entire lives, with the Java mouse deer being a prime example. While its lack of close relation to mice is likely obvious, but if it isn't, then I'd be concerned, you may be surprised to learn the species isn't a deer either. In fact, it and its close kin are more accurately referred to as chevretains, a word that is derived from Old French. Of course, the French language means about as much to me as size does as this 1 foot or 30 centimeter species, so I'll just keep calling it the Java mouse deer, thank you very much. Endemic to Java, this species is the world's smallest hoofed mammal. Unlike true deer, it doesn't have antlers, but it does have a pair of tusk-like upper canine teeth. Males use these to shiv each other and of course look fly as fuck.